what what are God's dreams? And in a certain way, you could see that this world is the dream of God. Like, think about if you were able to create anything that you wanted to create, if you had all power and you had complete freedom and you had all wisdom and knowledge and you had complete creativity and you were able to create anything that you wanted to create, what would you create? This world is the product of God's dream. It's the choice of his creation. And when he was able to create whatever he wanted to create, this is what he chose. And not just this world, but us. We are what God chose to create. You are what God chose to create. Out of everything God could have made, God made you. And out of any life that he could have chosen to give, he gave you the life that you have. And the crown of his creation is, I was talking to Tree about this, and Tree was saying that the center of everything is the cross. And the crown of God's creation is Jesus on the cross. Everything that came before and everything that came after, everything that is above or below or in any direction, every human thought, every experience, every moment, it is summed up in the central fact of the cross of Jesus and Jesus on the cross and God loving us perfectly through Jesus on the cross. And that is, we're working in a startup right now. We're doing AI, and we realize that the purpose is to reach people in Japan and the whole world. And AI is very powerful, and AI is one way to share the gospel to large numbers of people, and that's what we're working on. And the way to do that in Japan that we have followed is one of the several things we're doing. And one of them is to create the ability for people to experience imagination and dreams. And people are afraid to dream, and people don't feel like they're allowed to dream. And in some ways, the truth is only arrived at through dreaming. And um, think about this. Think about some of the truest experiences that you've ever had in your life. Um, the deepest ones, some of them, a lot of them, may have been while you were dreaming. And, like you wake up in the morning after a dream and you can't describe what you just experienced. It's obviously much deeper than daily life. And so even the fact that people dream is testimony that something invisible and powerful and not wondrous exists. And that's testimony to eternity, to God, to the level, the rule of imagination and above us. And so we're working in this area of helping people to dream through AI, to get a picture of what their life could be and to use their imagination. We're lending them imagination in a sense. And without having a close relationship to dreams, no one's life can become what it's meant to be. Because essentially, our lives are God's dream. And for us to know what our lives really are, we have to understand God, and to the extent we can. And part of understanding God is understanding dreams. Because to us, God himself is like a dream. God is better than a dream. And so if we're able to believe in dreams, we're better able to believe in God, because God's existence is better than anything that could happen to us. It's the actual truth of the situation we're in is so much better than any of us have the courage to believe is true. You know, it takes some courage to believe that something good is true, and very people who find themselves in very weak situations can't believe in anything good, or they can't believe that anything good will happen, and that comes from a situation, a state of possible weakness. But very strong people, for whatever reason, wherever their strength comes from, they're able to believe in something good. And, you know, there's a little side note there when we're talking about the source of strength. There's different sources of strength. There, God is our ultimate source of strength, and then there's a sense where we also need to be strong and choose to be strong, even though God is the source of our strength. But you know, sometimes when you're just using something, you don't need to get fixated necessarily on where it comes from. Ultimately, sometimes it's good to consider those things. But you know, in life, the reality of strength is we have it or we don't, and we have it, it's going to make certain things possible. And if we don't have it, we need to know where to seek it. And um, we need to seek it from God, and we also need to know that we need to choose that strength that God provides us. It's not just an automatic thing. You can't just say, oh, that person's strong, that person's weak, that's just the way they are. That's not true. Strength is a choice, just like morality is a choice. And God makes morality available to us, and he makes strength available to us. He makes goodness available to us. And goodness and morality, they're and strength, they all are somehow related. And they all are able to be chosen by us because of God. And so this is what Ephesians 6:10 says. It says, finally, he's at the conclusion of his really, you know, very important letter, probably just, you know, just a letter with some stunning things in it. The end of this letter, he's saying, 6:10, finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. And that there's this urging for us to be strong. And there's something to be said that believing you're strong makes you strong. You know, a lot of times we're not doing what's right because we don't believe we're strong enough. Like if I thought about the times when I gave into temptation, or even times like I'm trying to decide, you know, what should I do? Sometimes I'm making an excuse for myself and saying I'm not strong enough to do that, you know? And but I know that's wrong. Anytime we say we give ourselves a reason, a way out, and we say, I'm not strong enough to do that, that's licking defeat. That's tasting defeat. And, you know, whatever you taste, it begins to grow inside. And that taste of defeat is something that I think we need to learn to spit out of our mouth, you know, like Brother Nate was saying, um, you know, when they were going through all of those very difficult things, there was a strong temptation to give up or to complain. But, you know, he said that they didn't, and then they just praised God. And that's, you know, that's something that I've learned through experience is never complain, never blame any person. Complaining and blaming are signs of weakness. And what weakness does is it begets weakness. Weakness begets weakness. Strength begets strength. So once I start complaining, I'm making myself weaker, and I'm almost turning my back and letting the devil whip my back. And blaming someone is the same thing. When we blame someone, we've essentially admitted we're defeated. So complaining and blaming, those are things that we're not required to do, and we're able to have strength enough to do what is right. And um, when I stop for a second and realize that, oh, I'm about to make this choice and I'm tempted to choose the wrong thing, and I realize what's the background thinking I have, I think I'm believing I'm weak and I can't do it. And so when I realize that, it helps me realize, okay, I can stretch a little further and I can be patient here, or I can forgive, or I can do what's right, or I can be generous, or I can, give or something. That belief, strength is available, helps me. And this is what got me thinking about this earlier was sometime in the middle of the week I realized that the nature of temptation is when I feel temptation, the nature of temptation is it feels stronger than I am. And that's how it feels, and that's why it's temptation. It wouldn't be temptation if it didn't feel as though it was stronger than I am. But the reality is it's not stronger, it just feels that way. And part of what temptation teaches us is how to overrule our feelings. Like in a courtroom where the lawyer says something and then the judge says, overruled, overruled. That's what we have to do with the deception of temptation when we feel that we are weaker than it. We may feel we are weaker than it, but we need to overrule that and say, "Overruled. I overrule you." And that's the truth. Because with temptation, once we believe we're strong enough to overcome it, we've already overcome it. And there are a lot of things going on right now with pastors and leaders and all sorts of like a level of sexual immorality in us and in the world, in the Christianity. I mean, it's what Christians consider acceptable now, it was unthinkable 30 years ago, and what we've become thinking is normal now, it would have been considered absolutely unthinkable 30, 40 years ago. And that point in time is not necessarily everything was better, but there was a higher standard of biblical morality there. And then, from where we're at now, probably, there's going to be all this online bad stuff and virtual bad stuff and just the general deterioration. There's going to be spiritual evil, sexual spiritual evil that is rising up, greed and envy and murder and hate and all these things. There's all this hate too. The amount of hate in the world is increasing. And as like in Matthew 24, it says, because of the increase of lawlessness, the love of many will grow cold. So it's going to be all the temperature of all of these evil things is just going to keep going up and up and up. And one of the things that we're going to need, I believe, in order to keep standing firm above it, to be like a rock or a lighthouse, immovable, is a conviction that God makes unlimited strength available to us to do what is right in any circumstance. And that's what you have to have going into a fight, to know I can win, I can be stronger, I am stronger, and that is the way to survive. So temptation became easier for me once I started, and I kind of had a sense of this before, but as more clearly I realized it this week, is that a person who's facing temptation cannot win unless they believe they're strong enough to overcome it. And that's sort of the key. And there's the verse that says that God always gives us a way out. There's always a way out. So we may feel like, oh, I don't have any choice, I got to do this. But it's not true. We have a choice. Oh, Joseph, I think your mic might be on. And so, okay, anger is similar. How many of us got angry this week? How many of us were close to getting angry this week? Whenever we get angry, and what we're saying is this thing is bigger than us, because a bigger person never gets angry. There's a righteous anger, which is a separate category, but a bigger person never gets angry. Becoming angry is a sign of being a small person. Becoming angry is a sign of someone saying, I believe this thing is better than me, therefore I'm going to react out like a weak person, out of weakness, like a weakling. And I should call people names, even if it's us. But we should not believe that we're smaller than it. But that's never the case, that we're smaller than something because of Jesus, that we're never smaller than our circumstances. And so that is why God can tell us, never be angry. Be angry, but do not sin. When he probably means be angry is righteous anger, but righteous anger is pretty rare, I think, in terms of like, and what it even means, it looks like is a little bit of a mystery to us, right? Um, but the anger of man is not the righteousness of God. And so God can look at us straight in the eye and say, do not sin and become angry, and he can expect that we can do it because he expects us to believe what he's told us, that we are stronger and that we are bigger and that we can overcome all things by his mighty inner strength. And so this is a different. Okay, so then after just while we're talking about dreams, and this led to this consideration about how dreams require strength. And then one question was, oh, okay, well, what's the difference between pretending you're strong and um, you know believing that you're strong when you don't feel it? Um, like, is there a difference between those two things? Like sometimes I I'm acting like I'm strong when I'm not, and that's not right. That's a category where it's sin. So you can't just say be strong, act like you're strong, pretend because sometimes that will lead to sin. And Joseph had an interesting point. He said probably the difference is pride. When we're pretending we're strong and there's pride involved, like we're having a problem and someone asks us how we're doing and we can't admit we're having a problem. We say, I'm fine. You know what I mean? And that's pretending we're strong. There's pride in that. When there's pride in pretending we're strong, then it's sin. But if we're facing a dragon and there's a part of us that's afraid, we have to believe that we're strong, or we have to believe that strength is available in order to face that dragon. And that's not necessarily pride. That's sort of different. And I don't know if any of you have any thoughts about how is that situation different. But Joseph said that when David was fighting Goliath, it was like there's so much no chance of David beating Goliath that he couldn't have pride or confidence in his own strength. There's no question. It was out of the question that it was not even a contest. And so he had to lose it and just believe in God's strength, lose all thought of himself and just concentrate on God's strength. And so all the way to be ultimately strong is to have no thought of ourselves. And that's the opposite of pride. No thought of ourselves. And that's the way to face temptation is like, I died. I'm dead. I don't exist. It's just God. And yeah, if we love Jesus more than ourselves, we'll overcome every temptation, right? Well, that's if we're willing to surrender to Holy Spirit, we'll overcome every temptation. And that's part of this death to the self, and there's this war between the flesh and the spirit, and the flesh is lusting and grabbing and consumed with anger and hate and jealousy, you know and insecurity, but Holy Spirit in us is wanting to live by spirit, and spirit gives life. And so when we feel forced to choose what's wrong because we think we're weak, we're not weak, and we don't have to feel that way. And with David, he was doing God's dreams. Like, God maybe created this world for moments like that, when this young boy is able to face a giant and to give up of himself so much that in his weakness he can face this giant with God's strength. And that's what God is asking to us to do, is to live out his dreams, because this world exists because God dreamed this world and God dreamed us. And for us to fulfill his dreams, we not only have to give up our own dreams, we have to give up our own ideas of our own weakness, and we have to give up ourselves and to let Holy Spirit take control of our lives and do what happened with the apostles, where they could preach the gospel of Jesus. to uncountable numbers of people, because they were relying not on their own strength, but on the strength of God that he gives to us freely, and the resurrection of Jesus. Because after the cross, there was the resurrection of Jesus, and that was by Holy Spirit's power. And in Romans 8, it says that's the same power that is. So this is Romans chapter 8, verse 9. But you are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit, if indeed the Spirit of God dwells in you. Now, if anyone does not have the Spirit of Christ, he is not his. And if Christ is in you, the body is dead because of sin, but the Spirit is life because of righteousness. But if the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you, he who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies through his Spirit who dwells in you. And there's a correspondence there to verse 13 too, because he mentions mortal bodies again, and it says in this translation, it doesn't use the exact language, but in some it says mortal body. It says, for if you live according to the flesh, you will die, but if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live, or the deeds of our mortal body, you will live. And so there's a sequence here, is that we have to understand what's going on. This world exists because of God's dreams. We exist because of God's dreams. Our flesh gets in the way of that. We have to, through Holy Spirit's power, put to death our flesh. And if we put to death our flesh, it's a choice we have to make. It's choice is there. We have to choose it. Holy Spirit doesn't choose for us. But once we choose it, Holy Spirit has the power to enforce that, and he can put to death the deeds of our mortal body. And once we put the deeds of our mortal body, once we make the choice to let Holy Spirit put the deeds of our mortal body to death, then we can begin to live by this surpassing power of the resurrection of Jesus that will work inside of us. And that's how we have lives that are more like dreams than what we consider reality. And that's the ultimate goal, is that our life would become like God's dream for us.